From George Washington to 21st century history repeating itself with Donald Trump now serving as the 47th president. After a second non-consecutive term, every U.S. president has shaped the nation in unforgettable ways. In this video, we break down the story of each leader, the founding figures, the trailblazers, the groundbreakers, and the return of Trump himself. Get ready for a lightning-fast yet rich journey through American leadership. You might think you know the story of American presidents, but today's twist, Donald Trump bouncing back for a second term, reframes the entire narrative. We're counting them all, one by one, from number 1 to number 47. Let's roll. Number 1. George Washington, 1789 to 1797. We began with the very first president of the United States, George Washington. Known as the father of his country, Washington was not just a military hero who led the colonies to victory in the Revolutionary War. He also became the model for what a president should be. What makes Washington remarkable is that he had the chance to become something more than a president. Many wanted him to be king, but he refused, choosing instead to build a republic based on the will of the people. He was unanimously elected not once, but twice, something no other president has ever achieved. During his presidency, he set critical precedents, forming a cabinet of advisors, establishing the two-term tradition, and showing the world that American democracy was strong. And perhaps his most powerful legacy was what he chose not to do when his second term ended. He peacefully stepped down, proving leadership is not about clinging to power, but about serving the nation. Number 2. John Adams, 1797 to 1801. The second president, John Adams, was a fiery revolutionary who helped push America toward independence. A brilliant lawyer from Massachusetts, Adams was one of the loudest voices calling for freedom from Britain, and he even played a key role in drafting the Declaration of Independence. But Adams also left behind an underrated legacy. He strengthened the U.S. Navy, helped avoid an all-out war with France, and most importantly proved that democracy worked when he peacefully transferred power to his political rival, Thomas Jefferson. That moment was the first real test of America's democratic system, and it passed. 3. Thomas Jefferson, 1801-1809. The third president, Thomas Jefferson, was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, the very words that declared America's freedom. As president, Jefferson expanded the nation's size and vision with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, doubling U.S. territory overnight for just $15 million. Jefferson believed in a nation of farmers, limited government, and individual liberty, yet his presidency was full of contradictions. While he championed freedom, he also owned enslaved people. While he wanted a small government, he made one of the largest land deals in history. Still, his time in office reshaped America. He sent Lewis and Clark to explore the vast new lands, opening the door to Western expansion. Jefferson's bold leadership left a permanent mark on the map hand, on the very idea of what America could become. 4. James Madison, 1809 to 1817. Known as the father of the Constitution, James Madison was one of the sharpest minds in American history. He helped draft the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, forever shaping the foundation of U.S. government. As president, Madison faced one of America's earliest major conflicts, the War of 1812 against Britain. At first, the war went terribly. The British even marched into Washington, D.C., and set fire to the White House. But despite the setbacks, the U.S. emerged with a newfound sense of strength and independence. Madison's presidency proved that the young nation could survive a second clash with the most powerful empire in the world. And from the ashes of that war, America's identity as a resilient and independent power truly began to take shape. 5. James Monroe, 1817 to 1825. James Monroe's presidency is often remembered as the era of good feelings. After years of division and war, the country finally experienced a sense of unity and national pride. Monroe's biggest legacy was the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, a bold statement to the world that the Americas were off-limits to future European colonization. This policy would guide U.S. foreign relations for nearly 2 centuries, making Monroe one of the most influential voices in early American diplomacy. Domestically, his presidency saw expansion and the continued rise of American nationalism. But beneath the surface, tensions over slavery and states' rights were beginning to simmer. Still, Monroe's time in office gave the country a rare moment of stability, and his doctrine became a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy long after he was gone. 6. John Quincy Adams, 1825 to 1829. The son of John Adams, John Quincy Adams grew up in the very heart of the American Revolution. By the time he became the sixth president, he was already one of the most experienced diplomats in U.S. history, having negotiated treaties, served as an ambassador, and even helped draft the peace agreement that ended the War of 1812. But as President John Quincy Adams struggled. His vision was big. He wanted to modernize America with roads, canals, a national university, and even an observatory to study the stars. In many ways, he imagined the United States as a future superpower. Yet Congress resisted him at every turn, and political enemies painted him as out of touch. He lost re-election to Andrew Jackson, but Adams didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, he went back to Congress, where he became a fierce anti-slavery voice, proving that sometimes a president's greatest impact comes after leaving the White House. 7. Andrew Jackson, 1829 to 1837. Andrew Jackson, known as Old Hickory, was a fighter through and through. A war hero of the Battle of New Orleans, Jackson rode his reputation as a tough, no-nonsense leader straight into the presidency. He became the first president who truly styled himself as a champion of the common man, breaking the dominance of elite politicians and giving everyday Americans a sense of ownership in government. Under Jackson, democracy expanded, more white men gained the right to vote, and politics became more accessible to the masses. But Jackson's legacy is deeply controversial. He was a strong defender of the Union and crushed attempts by states to defy federal authority. Yet he also signed the Indian Removal Act, leading to the forced relocation of Native American tribes along the infamous Trail of Tears. Loved by some, hated by others, Andrew Jackson remains one of the most polarizing figures in American history scene, both as a people's president and as a symbol of injustice. 8. Martin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. Martin Van Buren, nicknamed the Little Magician, was a master of political strategy and one of the architects of the Democratic Party. He was also the first president born a U.S. citizen after the Revolution. Unfortunately, his presidency was overshadowed by the Panic of 1837, one of the worst economic depressions in American history. Banks collapsed, unemployment soared, and Van Buren's popularity sank. Though he tried reforms, he couldn't escape the blame. After losing re-election, Van Buren lived a long retirement, watching the nation slide toward civil war. He died in 1862, at the age of 79, in Kinderhook, New York, just 1 year into Abraham Lincoln's presidency and in the middle of America's greatest conflict. 9. William Henry Harrison, 1841. William Henry Harrison is remembered for having the shortest presidency in history. A celebrated war hero from the Battle of Tippecanoe, he won the election with the famous slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," but his time in office was tragically brief. On March 4, 1841, Harrison gave the longest inaugural speech ever, 2 hours, in cold, wet weather, without a coat. Just a month later, he fell sick with pneumonia and died on April 4, 1841, only 31 days into his term. Harrison's sudden death shocked the young nation and set an important precedent. His vice president, John Tyler, would step in and take over the presidency completely, shaping how succession would work in the future. 10. John Tyler, 1841 to 1845. John Tyler became president in an unexpected way. After William Henry Harrison's sudden death, Tyler became the first vice president in U.S. history to fully assume the presidency. At the time, it wasn't even clear if a vice president should become the actual president or just act temporarily. But Tyler boldly declared himself the real deal, setting a precedent that lasts to this day. His time in office was rocky. Nicknamed his Accidency, Tyler often clashed with his own party, the Whigs, and they eventually expelled him from their ranks. Still, he managed important accomplishments, including pushing for the annexation of Texas. After his presidency, Tyler sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, making him the only former U.S. president to openly join a rebellion against the Union. He died on January 18, 1862. At age 71, in Richmond, Virginia, ironically during the very war that tested the nation he once led. 11. James K. Polk, 1845 to 1849. James K. Polk is often called the dark horse president. Few expected him to win. But once in office, he accomplished almost everything he promised. Polk expanded America's territory more than almost any other president. Under his leadership, the U.S. annexed Texas, settled the Oregon boundary with Britain, and fought the Mexican-American war-winning vast lands that would later become California, Arizona, New Mexico, and more. Polk was a workaholic, known for his intense focus and long hours, but he served only one term exactly as he had pledged. He left office in 1849, exhausted but triumphant. Sadly, his retirement was brief. Just 3 months later, he fell ill likely from cholera, died on June 15, 1849, at only 53 years old, the youngest age at death of any president after leaving office. 12. Zachary Taylor, 1849 to 1850. Zachary Taylor, known as Old Rough and Ready, was a career soldier who became a national hero during the Mexican-American War. His popularity as a tough no-nonsense general carried him straight into the White House even, though he had little political experience. As president, Taylor opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, putting him at odds with many in the South. Despite being a slave owner himself, his presidency showed signs of strong leadership during a tense time, but it was cut short. On July 9, 1850, just 16 months into his term, Taylor died suddenly after falling ill, reportedly from severe stomach problems after eating spoiled fruit and milk. He was 65 years old, making him the second president to die in office. 13. Millard Fillmore, 1852-1853. When Zachary Taylor died, Vice President Millard Fillmore stepped in as the 13th president. Fillmore's term was dominated by the fierce debates over slavery that were tearing the nation apart. He supported the Compromise of 1850, which temporarily eased tensions by admitting California as a free state, but also enforcing the controversial Fugitive Slave Act requiring escaped slaves to be returned to their owners. This decision made him deeply unpopular in the North, even though he believed it would preserve the Union. After leaving office, Fillmore failed in another presidential run, this time with the anti-immigrant Know Nothing Party. He lived quietly afterward and died on March 8, 1874, at age 74 in Buffalo, New York. 14. Franklin Pierce, 1853 to 1857. Franklin Pierce, the 14th president, came into office as a handsome young leader full of promise, but his presidency is often remembered as one of the weakest. A Democrat from New Hampshire, Pierce hoped to keep the nation united as tensions over slavery grew, but his decisions only made things worse. He signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. Instead of calming the issue, it led to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas and pushed America closer to civil war. Pierce's personal life was equally tragic. All 3 of his children died young, and he struggled with grief and alcoholism throughout his life. After leaving office, he lived in obscurity and died on October 8, 1869, at the age of 64. 15. James Buchanan, 1857 to 1861. James Buchanan, the only lifelong bachelor president, is often ranked as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history, not because he was corrupt, but because of his failure to act when the country needed him most. During his presidency, the issue of slavery tore the nation apart. Buchanan believed the Constitution left him powerless to stop Southern states from seceding, so he did nothing. By the time he left office in March 1861, 7 states had already left the Union, and Abraham Lincoln inherited a nation on the brink of civil war. Buchanan never escaped the shadow of that failure. He spent his retirement writing defenses of his presidency, but history judged him harshly. He died on June 1, 1868, at the age of 77, just 3 years after the Civil War ended. 16. Abraham Lincoln, 1861 to 1865. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, is often remembered as America's greatest leader. Born in a log cabin with little formal education, Lincoln rose to the highest office through determination, intelligence, and his gift for words. When he took office, the country was falling apart. 7 southern states had already seceded, and soon the Civil War began. Lincoln's leadership during this darkest time preserved the Union. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free, a turning point in the fight for human liberty. His Gettysburg Address reminded the nation of its founding ideals, and his ability to connect with ordinary Americans gave him unmatched respect. But just days after leading the Union to victory, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. He died the next morning, April 15th, at just 56 years old, becoming a martyr for freedom and unity. 17. Andrew Johnson, 1865 to 1869. Andrew Johnson became president after Lincoln's assassination, but he struggled to fill the shoes of the fallen leader. A Southern Democrat who had stayed loyal to the Union, Johnson faced the enormous challenge of Reconstruction to bring the Southern states back into the nation and define freedom for millions of newly emancipated people. Johnson clashed bitterly with Congress, especially the radical Republicans who wanted stronger protections for former slaves. He vetoed civil rights legislation, tried to block the 14th Amendment, and resisted efforts to reshape the South. The conflict grew so fierce that Johnson became the first U.S. president ever impeached. He survived removal by just one vote in the Senate, but his political power was destroyed. After leaving office, he returned to Tennessee and eventually served again in the Senate. Johnson died on July 31, 1875, at the age of 66. 18. Ulysses S. Grant, 1869 to 1877. Ulysses S. Grant, the Union's top general in the Civil War, became the 18th President of the United States, known as Unconditional Surrender Grant. He was celebrated for defeating the Confederacy and bringing the war to a close. As president, Grant worked to protect the rights of newly freed African Americans. He fought against the Ku Klux Klan and pushed for Reconstruction laws to secure equality. His presidency showed strong moral commitment, but it was plagued by corruption scandals among his cabinet and associates, problems that overshadowed his leadership. After leaving office, Grant traveled the world and later wrote his famous memoirs, considered one of the best books ever written by a U.S. president. He died of throat cancer on July 23, 1885, at the age of 63, leaving behind a legacy as both a war hero and a flawed but determined leader. 19. Rutherford B. Hayes, 1877 to 1881. Rutherford B. Hayes became president after one of the most disputed elections in U.S. history. The race of 1876 ended in chaos, and Hayes only secured the presidency through a backroom deal known as the Compromise of 1877. That compromise had a massive impact. It ended Reconstruction by pulling federal troops out of the South, while it brought peace to a divided nation. It also left millions of African Americans vulnerable to segregation and violence under new Jim Crow laws. Hayes focused on civil service reform and rebuilding national trust, but his presidency is remembered most for the way it ended Reconstruction. After one term, he retired from politics and dedicated himself to education and humanitarian causes. He died on January 17, 1893, at the age of 70. 20. James A. Garfield, 1881. James A. Garfield, the 20th president, rose from poverty to power. Born in a log cabin in Ohio, he worked his way through school, became a Civil War general, and later a respected congressman. Garfield entered the White House with big plans. He wanted to reform the corrupt patronage system in government, strengthen civil rights for African Americans, and modernize the nation, but he never had the chance to see his vision through. On July 2, 1881, just 4 months into his presidency, Garfield was shot by a disgruntled office seeker at a Washington train station. He lingered for months as doctors struggled to save him, but infections set in. He died on September 19, 1881, at just 49 years old, making him one of the shortest-serving presidents in history. 21. Chester A. Arthur, 1881 to 1885. Chester A. Arthur, Garfield's vice president, was a man many doubted when he stepped into the presidency. Nicknamed the gentleman boss, Arthur had ties to the political machine system and was expected to continue corruption. But to everyone's surprise, Arthur rose to the occasion. He championed civil service reform, signing the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which made government jobs based on merit instead of political favors. His stylish looks and refined taste earned him the nickname Elegant Arthur, and he even upgraded the White House's decor. Though he never ran for a second term, Arthur left behind a reputation as a president who defied expectations. He died just a year after leaving office. on November 18, 1886, at the age of 57 from kidney disease. 22. Grover Cleveland, 1885 to 1889 and 1893 to 1897. Grover Cleveland holds a special place in U.S. history as the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, making him both the 22nd and 24th president, a Democrat known for his honesty. He stood out during an era often marked by political corruption. In his first term, Cleveland focused on fighting government waste and vetoed more bills than all his predecessors combined. He also battled for lower tariffs and economic reform, but he lost re-election in 1888 to Benjamin Harrison, despite winning the popular vote. Cleveland made a stunning comeback in 1892, regaining the presidency. His second term, however, was dominated by the Panic of 1893, one of the worst depressions in U.S. history. He struggled through economic turmoil, labor unrest, and fierce criticism. After leaving office for good, he lived a quieter life until his death on June 24, 1908, at the age of 71. 23. Benjamin Harrison, 1889 to 1893. Benjamin Harrison, the grandson of former President William Henry Harrison, became the 23rd president after defeating Grover Cleveland in 1888. Unlike his grandfather, whose term lasted only a month, Benjamin served a full 4 years. During his presidency, the nation saw rapid industrial growth. Harrison signed the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first law aimed at limiting monopolies, and worked to modernize the Navy. He also admitted 6 new states into the Union, the most under any president since George Washington. However, high tariffs and economic struggles made him unpopular, and Cleveland defeated him in a rematch in 1892. Harrison lived out his later years practicing law and died on March 13, 1901, at the age of 67. 25. William McKinley, 1897 to 1901. William McKinley, the 25th president, led America into the 20th century and oversaw the nation's rise as a global power. A veteran of the Civil War, McKinley was known for his calm leadership and commitment to economic growth. His presidency is best remembered for the Spanish-American War of 1898, which lasted just a few months but had massive consequences. The U.S. defeated Spain and gained control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, marking America's first steps as an overseas empire. McKinley was re-elected in 1900, but tragedy struck soon after. On September 6, 1901, he was shot by an anarchist while attending a public event in Buffalo, New York. He died of his wounds on September 14, 1901, at age 58, making him the 3rd U.S. president assassinated. 26. Theodore Roosevelt, 1901 to 1909. After McKinley's assassination, his energetic vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, became the youngest president in U.S. history at just 42 years old. Bold, fearless, and charismatic, Roosevelt transformed the presidency into a platform for action. He was a progressive reformer, known as a trustbuster for breaking up powerful monopolies. He also pushed for conservation, creating national parks, forests, and monuments to preserve America's natural beauty. Internationally, he expanded U.S. influence, overseeing the construction of the Panama Canal, and even winning the Nobel Peace Prize for brokering peace in the Russo-Japanese War. Roosevelt left office wildly popular, famous for his motto, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." He died later on January 6, 1919, at age 60, but his larger-than-life personality made him one of the most iconic presidents in American history. 27. William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913. William Howard Taft, the 27th president, had perhaps the most unusual career path of any American leader. He is the only person in history to serve as both president and Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Taft didn't really want to be president, he preferred law and the courts. But his close friend Theodore Roosevelt pushed him into running. As president, Taft continued some progressive reforms, but he lacked Roosevelt's energy and charisma. He often clashed with progressives and eventually even with Roosevelt himself, splitting the Republican Party. After leaving the White House, however, Taft finally achieved his lifelong dream. In 1921, he was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, where he served with distinction for nearly a decade. Taft died on March 8, 1930, at the age of 72. 28. Woodrow Wilson, 1913 to 1921. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president, was a scholar, reformer, and wartime leader, a former university professor and president of Princeton. Wilson entered politics with a vision to make government more fair and efficient. At home, he pushed progressive reforms like the Federal Reserve System and stronger antitrust laws. But it was World War I that defined his presidency. Wilson kept America neutral at first, but in 1917, he led the U.S. into the war, declaring it a fight to make the world safe for democracy. After the war, Wilson championed the League of Nations, the forerunner to the United Nations, but Congress rejected it, and the U.S. stayed out. Wilson also suffered a severe stroke in 1919 that left him partially paralyzed, and his wife Edith quietly managed many presidential duties in his place. He died just 3 years after leaving office, on February 3, 1924, at the age of 67. 29. Warren G. Harding, 1921 to 1923. Warren G. Harding, the 29th president, came to office promising a return to normalcy after the chaos of World War I, charismatic and popular. He won by a landslide, promising peace and prosperity for Americans weary of war and reform. However, Harding's presidency is often remembered for corruption scandals. The most infamous was the Teapot Dome scandal, in which government officials secretly leased federal oil reserves for personal gain. Harding himself was not directly involved, but his administration's reputation suffered greatly. Tragically, Harding's life ended abruptly. On August 2, 1923, while on a speaking tour in California, he suffered a fatal heart attack. He was just 57 years old. Despite the scandals, Harding's death sparked a nationwide outpouring of grief for the friendly, approachable leader. 30. Calvin Coolidge, 1923 to 1929. Calvin Coolidge, known as Silent Cal, took office after Harding's sudden death. A man of few words, Coolidge became famous for his quiet, steady leadership and his belief in limited government and business-friendly policies. During his presidency, America experienced the Roaring Twenties, a period of unprecedented economic growth, technological innovation, and cultural change. Coolidge promoted fiscal responsibility, keeping taxes low and the federal budget balanced. Despite his calm demeanor, Coolidge left a lasting impact by proving that quiet, principled leadership can succeed in turbulent times. After leaving office, he returned to Massachusetts and lived a long retirement, dying on January 5, 1933, at the age of 60. 31. Herbert Hoover, 1929 to 1933. Herbert Hoover entered the White House with a reputation as a brilliant humanitarian. Before becoming president, he was famous for organizing massive food relief efforts during World War I, saving millions from starvation. Americans saw him as a man who could solve any crisis. But less than a year into his presidency, the stock market crash of 1929 struck, unleashing the Great Depression. Hoover believed in limited government and voluntary cooperation to fix the economy. But as unemployment soared and people lost their homes, many saw him as out of touch. Shantytowns built by the homeless were mockingly called Hoover. Though he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, his reputation was ruined. After losing re-election, Hoover lived a long life, gradually regaining respect as an elder statesman. He died on October 20, 1964, at the age of 90. 32. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933 to 1945. Franklin D. Roosevelt, often called FDR, became the 32nd president at the lowest point of the Great Depression. With his confident voice and bold policies, he reassured Americans that better days were ahead. His New Deal programs created jobs, reformed banks, and gave hope to millions. But Roosevelt's leadership went beyond the Depression. When World War II broke out, he became the only U.S. president elected to 4 terms, guiding the nation through both economic collapse and global war. His fireside chats brought comfort to homes across the country, and his vision of a more active government reshaped American politics forever. FDR's health, however, was failing. On April 12, 1945, just months before the end of World War II, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 63. His sudden death shocked the nation, but his legacy as one of the greatest American presidents endures. 33. Harry S. Truman, 1945 to 1953. Harry S. Truman became president suddenly in April 1945 after Franklin Roosevelt's unexpected death. Thrust into leadership during the final months of World War II, Truman made one of the most controversial decisions in history, authorizing the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. which brought Japan's surrender, but at a devastating human cost. After the war, Truman guided America through the start of the Cold War. He introduced the Truman Doctrine to contain communism and helped rebuild Europe with the Marshall Plan. He also made the bold move of desegregating the U.S. military, a key step toward civil rights. Despite facing low approval at times, Truman left office with a reputation for plain-spoken honesty and decisive leadership. He lived a long retirement and died on December 26, 1972, at the age of 88. 34. Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961. Dwight D. Eisenhower, affectionately known as Ike, was a five-star general and the supreme Allied commander during World War II before becoming the 34th president. His calm, reassuring presence made him one of the most trusted leaders of the 20th century. As president, Eisenhower focused on keeping the nation strong during the Cold War while also promoting peace. Domestically, he launched the Interstate Highway System, the largest public works project in U.S. history, transforming travel and commerce. Eisenhower's presidency also saw the early days of the Civil Rights Movement, including the desegregation of schools after the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision. He left office highly popular, remembered for his steady leadership. Eisenhower died on March 28, 35. John F. Kennedy, 1961 to 1963. John F. Kennedy, often remembered simply as JFK, was the youngest man ever elected president at just 43 years old. His charm, inspiring speeches, and vision for a new frontier made him a symbol of hope and progress in the early 1960s. Kennedy's presidency saw major challenges, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion and the tense Cuban Missile Crisis, where he skillfully avoided nuclear war with the Soviet Union. He also pushed for civil rights, space exploration, famously declaring that America would land a man on the moon, and worked to inspire a new generation to public service, with his call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Tragically, Kennedy's life was cut short when he was assassinated on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, at the age of 46. His death shocked the world, but his legacy lives on as one of America's most beloved presidents. 36. Lyndon B. Johnson, 1963 to 1969. Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ, became president after Kennedy's assassination, a master of political deal-making. Johnson used his skills to push through some of the most significant reforms in American history. His Great Society programs aimed to fight poverty and racial injustice, creating Medicare, Medicaid, and major civil rights laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark achievements, ending legal segregation and protecting African American voting rights. However, Johnson's presidency was overshadowed by the Vietnam War. As the conflict escalated, protests erupted across the country, and public opinion turned sharply against him. By 1968, deeply unpopular, Johnson chose not to run for re-election. He retired to his Texas ranch, where he died on January 22, 1973, at the age of 64. 37. Richard Nixon, 1969 to 1974. Richard Nixon, the 37th president, is one of the most complex and controversial figures in American history. On the global stage, he scored remarkable successes, easing tensions with the Soviet Union, signing arms control treaties, and famously opening diplomatic relations with China after decades of isolation. But Nixon's handling of the Vietnam War brought deep criticism. While he promised peace with honor, his administration secretly expanded the war into neighboring Cambodia and Laos, authorizing a massive bombing campaign along the Cambodian border to target North Vietnamese supply lines. These bombings destabilized the region and fueled unrest both abroad and at home, sparking huge protests in the United States. At home, Nixon's presidency collapsed under the weight of the Watergate scandal, involving a break-in and cover-up tied to his re-election campaign. With impeachment almost certain, Nixon made history as the first and only U.S. president to resign on August 9, 1974. Though his foreign policy achievements were significant, his legacy remains forever stained by scandal and controversy. He died on April 22, 1994, at the age of 81. 38. Gerald Ford, 1974 to 1977. Gerald Ford stepped into the presidency during one of the darkest moments in U.S. history. After Richard Nixon resigned over Watergate, a man of integrity, Ford sought to restore trust in government and calm a shaken nation. But his presidency was immediately controversial. His decision to pardon Nixon for any crimes angered many Americans and damaged his popularity. Economically, the country faced inflation, unemployment, and energy shortages. In foreign affairs, Ford oversaw the chaotic final withdrawal from Vietnam in 1975. When desperate South Vietnamese citizens tried to flee as Saigon fell, that same year, Cambodia also fell to the Khmer Rouge, ushering in one of the most tragic genocides of the 20th century. Though his time in office was short, Ford was respected for his honesty and decency. He lived a long life and passed away on December 26, 2006, at the age of 93. 39. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981. Jimmy Carter, a former peanut farmer and governor of Georgia, became the 39th president with a promise of honesty and moral leadership after the scandals of Watergate. Carter emphasized human rights in foreign policy, seeking to make America a moral leader in the world. He brokered the historic Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, a peace deal that still holds today. But his presidency also faced major struggles: soaring inflation, an energy crisis, and the humiliating Iran hostage crisis, where 52 Americans were held captive for 444 days. During Carter's term, Southeast Asia was still suffering the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the secret bombings in Cambodia. The rise of the Khmer Rouge regime, followed by Vietnamese intervention, created turmoil that Carter's administration struggled to respond to. Though often criticized during his presidency, Carter went on to become one of the most admired former presidents, dedicating his life to humanitarian work and winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. He remains a symbol of humility and service. 40. Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 1989. Ronald Reagan, a former Hollywood actor and governor of California, became the 40th president and one of the most influential conservative leaders in modern history. Known as the Great Communicator, his optimistic vision helped restore American confidence after the turbulent 1970s. Reagan pushed for lower taxes, deregulation, and a smaller government role in the economy, a philosophy often called Reaganomics. Supporters credit it with sparking economic growth, though critics say it widened inequality. On the world stage, Reagan took a hard line against the Soviet Union, famously declaring it the evil empire. Yet by his second term, he shifted toward diplomacy, building a relationship with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Their arms reduction agreements and cooperation are seen as key steps that helped bring the Cold War to an end. Reagan survived an assassination attempt in 1981 and left office highly popular. Later, he revealed he was battling Alzheimer's disease. He died on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93. 41. George H.W. Bush, 1989 to 1993. George H.W. Bush, the 41st president, had one of the most impressive resumes in U.S. politics. World War II Navy pilot, congressman, ambassador, CIA director, and vice president under Reagan. As president, Bush is best remembered for his steady leadership during the Gulf War of 1991. When Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait, Bush built a massive international coalition that successfully drove Iraqi forces out in just 100 hours of ground combat. At home, however, Bush struggled with a slowing economy and faced criticism for breaking his famous campaign promise: read my lips, no new taxes. This hurt his popularity and contributed to his 1992 election loss. Bush lived a long and respected life after leaving office, often admired for his humility and service. He died on November 30, 2018, at the age of 94. 42. Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001. Bill Clinton, the 42nd president, came from humble beginnings in Arkansas and rose to national prominence with his charisma and political skill. At just 46, he became one of the youngest presidents in history. His presidency oversaw a period of strong economic growth, record budget surpluses, and the expansion of global trade, including the NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico. Clinton also promoted education reform and welfare changes, but his time in office was also marked by scandal. The Monica Lewinsky affair led to his impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1998. making him only the second U.S. president ever impeached. He was acquitted by the Senate and remained popular with the public, finishing his term with high approval ratings. After leaving office, Clinton focused on humanitarian work through the Clinton Foundation, becoming a global figure in charity and diplomacy. 43. George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009. George W. Bush, the son of former President George H.W. Bush, became the 43rd president after a highly contested election in 2000. His presidency was defined by the tragic events of September 11, 2001. When terrorist attacks struck New York and Washington, D.C., Bush rallied the nation with his leadership and launched the War on Terror, including the invasion of Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. In 2003, he also led the controversial Iraq War, claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction claims that were never proven. The war's long cost in lives and resources remains one of the most debated aspects of his legacy. At home, Bush cut taxes, expanded Medicare, and dealt with crises like Hurricane Katrina and the 2008 financial collapse. After leaving office, he largely stepped back from politics, focusing on painting and veteran support. Despite controversies, he is often admired for his steady resolve during difficult times. 44. Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017. Barack Obama made history as the first African-American president of the United States. Elected in 2008 during the Great Recession, he inspired millions with his message of hope and "Yes, we can." Obama's presidency brought major changes, including the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which expanded health care access to millions of Americans. He also signed the Wall Street Reform Act after the financial crisis, repealed the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, and appointed 2 women to the Supreme Court. In foreign policy, Obama ordered the mission that killed al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in 2011. He also signed a nuclear deal with Iran and worked to restore diplomatic ties with Cuba. Though praised for his calm leadership, he also faced criticism for partisanship in Washington and ongoing wars overseas. After leaving office, Obama remained an influential global figure, author, and advocate for democracy and leadership. 45. Donald J. Trump, 2017 to 2021 and 2025 present. Donald Trump, a billionaire businessman and television personality, shocked the political world by winning the 2016 election as the first U.S. president with no prior political or military experience. During his first term, Trump pursued an America First agenda, cutting taxes, reshaping trade deals, and appointing 3 conservative Supreme Court justices. His presidency was highly polarizing, with strong support from his base but fierce opposition from critics. He faced 2 impeachments, the first for abuse of power and the second for incitement of insurrection after the January 6 Capitol attack, though he was acquitted both times. After losing the 2020 election to Joe Biden, Trump remained an active force in politics and staged a historic comeback in 2024, winning re-election and returning to the White House in 2025. Now serving his second non-consecutive term, Trump continues to shape us and global politics with his bold, controversial style. 46. Joe Biden, 2021 to 2025. Joe Biden, the 46th president, had one of the longest careers in American politics before reaching the White House. A former senator from Delaware and vice president under Barack Obama, he won the 2020 election during a time of deep national division. Biden's presidency focused on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, passing massive relief packages and leading a nationwide vaccination campaign. He also invested in infrastructure, signed climate agreements, and strengthened alliances abroad. However, his administration faced challenges: high inflation, a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, and fierce political polarization. While he emphasized unity and restoring America's global standing, his approval ratings often struggled under the weight of domestic and international crises. Biden left office in January 2025, making way for Donald Trump's return to the presidency. Donald Trump returned to power in 2025 after a dramatic political comeback, making him the only U.S. president since Grover Cleveland to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Now serving as the 47th president, Trump continues his America First agenda, focusing on immigration, trade, and reshaping U.S. foreign policy. His leadership remains bold, divisive, and unpredictable, with loyal supporters praising his strength while critics warn about threats to democracy. With Trump back in office, America once again finds itself at the center of intense global attention, as his decisions shape not only the future of the United States, but also the balance of world power. Thanks for watching all 47 U.S. presidents. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. And comment below, which president do you think changed America the most? We love reading your thoughts.